In this lesson, we're going to take a look at animating more than one layer at a time within Photoshop. The last little demo I did, we just animated Rusty going from one side of the screen to the other. This time, we have this document which has 4 layers. Rusty, a layer I called Sheila with the cat, the orange heart layer, and the exclamation point. So we can animate all these independently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the animation first for Rusty. I'm going to have him start on the screen here. I'm going to have him leap in up here as the next keyframe. I'm going to have him leap then down to Sheila's arms, 3rd keyframe. 4th keyframe, I'm going to put him up here in the corner, and then we'll stop. So let's do that. I have the playhead at 0, 0, 0. You can see that in the extreme lower left corner here. I'm going to twiddle down the triangle by Rusty, and I've got Rusty where I want him to start. I've got the playhead at 0, that's where I want it to start, and I'm going to click the stopwatch to tell Photoshop we're going to make keyframes based upon position. So I'm going to click the stopwatch, as I have to do this initially. That turns this on, and so at this keyframe, at this time, it remembers where Rusty is at. Rusty. I'm going to move ahead a half a second, about 15 frames, and I'm going to move Rusty, but make sure the layer's picked for Rusty. I'm going to move him up here. That added a diamond because we changed his position, and that's what we turned on. We turned on keyframing for position. So we moved the playhead, we moved Rusty, it made a new keyframe. I'm going to move the playhead to 1 second. I'm going to move Rusty down into Sheila's arms, and that's going to make another keyframe. Then I'm going to come over here. I'm going to move the timeline over to 15, and I'm going to do something a little bit different. I want Rusty to stay there in Sheila's arms for a half a second. So I move the playhead, but I'm not moving Rusty. I'm not moving any layer. I'm just going to come over and click on this little icon over here on the far left where I can add a keyframe manually. Now what happens is that Photoshop is basically saying a keyframe for this time and this position, and since we didn't move Rusty or anything else, it's identical, and these two are the same. So this will play for half a second with just Rusty being in Sheila's arms. Now the next keyframe I'm going to have happen another 15 seconds later. I'm going to move Rusty up to here. So that's all the keyframes I want for Rusty. I'm going to play this. Wait, go. So watch it here. It's going to go, wait, go. All right. So now we've got this done. I'm going to move the playhead back now to the beginning. Now, right now, I have everything showing up here, all these items. But what I want to happen is I don't really want the 2 pieces of artwork, the heart and the exclamation point, I don't really want them to show up until Rusty is in Sheila's arms. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the playhead so it's over this diamond, which marks the spot where Rusty's in Sheila's arms. And I'm going to come down here on the orange heart, and I'm going to do something called opacity. I'm going to say, Photoshop, I want you to remember keyframes for opacity, and that means transparency. So I'm going to click there and mark 1. I'm going to come to the exclamation point, click opacity, and it's going to put a keyframe there. Both the heart and the exclamation point are at what are called 100% opacity. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to move the playhead, we'll say, a little bit back. Let's say we move it back to 15 frames. And I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to come over under the orange heart, and I'm going to click the word opacity. I'm going to go over to the layers panel, and I can change the opacity up here for this piece of artwork to 0. So what's going to happen when the animation plays, as Rusty starts to fall into Sheila's arms, the heart will fade in. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to click on under the exclamation point, opacity, and I'm going to change the opacity of that graphic down to 0. So what should happen is I drag these across, those two icons, or those heart and the exclamation point, they should fade in. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the playhead over here to where the keyframe just before Dusty leaves, right about here at 1 second and 15 frames. I'm going to come to the orange heart. I'm going to click on opacity. I'm going to change the opacity back to 0. I'm going to click on opacity under the exclamation point, and I'm going to change the value for the opacity down to 0. So you know what's going to happen. Dusty's going to start the beginning, and as soon as Rusty gets to full height and starts coming down, the two icons are going to show up. They're going to stay there until about 1:15. They're going to start to fade completely out, and then Rusty will fade up to that corner. So I basically, to have the icon of the exclamation point and the heart to fade in and out, I set the time where I want the opacity to change. At this point it was 0 for the opacity for the heart and the exclamation point, and I said at this point in time we changed the opacity to 100%, so it faded up. And so he stays there for half a second, and as he does, the two icons start to fade, and then he starts to move off. So this is just another way that I wanted to show you that we can animate some things. I'll leave this as it is, and I hope you get a chance to take a look at this, and then we'll chat.